The qualitative interview. How come psychology trains over-engineered robots? Well, I'm going to tell you in this video. Why I'm negative.
Back to the story, because I've got some top tips. Helps people like me stop doing stupid things.
So I've just completed supervision of students on the undergraduate qualitative methods unit that I run here in our psychology degree at CQ University. Great bunch of students this year, and I'm not just saying that in case if anyone's watching from that class. If they are, hello again. Now, this was a big component of the unit, the qualitative interviewing part, and it's providing supervision of students as they undertake a qualitative interview so that we can say to our ethics committee that our students have the skills to undertake qualitative research. Now, what I do is I set up a Zoom meeting where I sit in on two students and watch them role play an online interview, their practice interview, if you like. And then I give them feedback on their interviewing skills, which they use to then go on to do an interview, which they record, and they send it to me, and then I assess their performance in their interview. They just edit the best bits of their interview. It's not a long interview, about 5 minutes worth of interviewing that they show me, and I assess them on their skills. And I assess their interviewing skills using just two criteria, which are encouragement and flexibility and listening. Now, encouragement is where I'm looking for the interviewer to communicate respect and interest in what their interviewee is saying. And flexibility and listening is where I'm looking for the interviewer to show their listening and that they can adapt their questions to what the interviewee is talking about. Now, the most common problem I find when students undertake their practice interview is they become quite robotic and they rattle their way through their prepared series of questions. And this is an example of what kind of happens.
So, hello, Paul. Now, let me get my first question. Here it is. How do psychology students talk about mental health? Give me some examples to illustrate your point. I think they mostly talk about it in terms of something that you can diagnose, something that's medical. They talk about stuff like depression and schizophrenia. That was interesting. Now, my second question. Do you think students see workload as something that is stressful? I don't know. I guess so.
So they struggle to show interest in their interviewee, to encourage their interviewee, and to show flexibility and listening skills by being responsive to what their interviewee has said. And they come across as robotic because they show little or no emotion. Their face freezes into this kind of neutral stare. So they start off by looking at their list of questions, which straight away takes their attention away from their interviewee. They read out their question, their first question, and then they wait for their interviewee to respond. And because both the interviewer and interviewee are still kind of warming up at that stage, the interviewee's initial response tends to be short, and so the interviewer says, "Thanks, that was interesting," and then they just shift straight to their next question. And that next question is what's written down on their script, which means the interviewer again shifts their focus away from the interviewee, and often that second question is either unrelated to what their interviewee was talking about or moves the discussion away from what the interviewee was starting to talk about. Now, what should the interviewer be doing? How should they do it differently? Well, they shouldn't be looking at their notes. Hey, if the interviewer is that interested in the topic, they wouldn't need to remind themselves of it from a sheet of paper. When we're interested in someone's thoughts or we want to hear about their experiences, we don't have to write down our questions. Our natural curiosity kicks in. We just ask those short follow-up questions. And because we're keen to hear what they have to say, we show encouragement. So it kind of goes a bit like this.
Hi, Paul. Can you tell me how you think psychology students talk about mental health? I think they mostly talk about it in terms of something that you can diagnose, something that's medical. They talk about stuff like depression and schizophrenia. That's really interesting, that medical understanding. I think that's a key point. Now, could you tell me a bit more about that? Yeah, well, it's like depression is an illness. That's kind of how we get taught in psychology. People are ill because there's something wrong going on in their brain. And another thing, it's really about understanding things like pathology. It's that sense you're being, like a proper doctor when you study it because it's medical and stuff. I think that's why people get a kick out of it.
And that's what I'm after in a qualitative interviewer. And once I point out to students that they're acting like some weird robot spewing out pre-programmed, over-engineered questions, they get up pretty quickly and become more human and turn into great interviewers. They start to get what their role is, which is mostly about listening and encouraging the interviewee to speak. Now, some students find throwing away their list of questions scary, but also they find the idea of showing encouragement to be initially a bit troublesome. They tell me it just feels wrong. And students are often worried about being too encouraging towards their interviewee because they worry it'll bias the interview. And this is what makes their performance so robotic. They don't want to bias their interviewee. And the problem with not encouraging their interviewee is that their interviewee is left guessing as to what the interviewer might find interesting. At best, they'll make assumptions as to what you're interested in, and you won't ever find out what those assumptions are. So you're still influencing the interviewee because they're talking to you and they're second guessing what you're interested in. So at worst, they'll clam up because you're not showing them any encouragement and they don't feel that anything they have to say is of interest to you. And the worst thing that happens is at the end of the interview, a participant says to you something like, "Oh, I hope I gave you something useful." And that's a sign that you didn't offer them enough or even any encouragement during the interview, which means you were kind of a bit of a jerk as an interviewer. You didn't tell them that they were interesting. So if you encourage your participant, you're signaling that whatever way they're answering your question is of interest to you. And if you do that right from the start and you're consistent with that, its main effect is going to be to help your participant open up and share their thoughts with you. And that's exactly the type of influence that you want to have on your interviewee. You want to encourage them to talk. You want them to talk. It's an interview. Yeah? So you do want to influence them to talk. But showing encouragement and throwing away your interview questions and being guided by your interviewee is really hard to do. And this year, during the feedback session, after I watched a couple of students do their practice interview, one student, after I'd said, I'd criticized them for, doing the scary robot thing, and we were talking about how it was difficult, why they were finding it difficult being a bit more human and showing emotion and being encouraging and being more flexible in how they asked questions and to get rid of their script. And they were talking about how it was tough. And these are the discussions where I link into to thinking about paradigm issues in psychology, research paradigms, how the quantitative paradigm dominates, which is all about trying to be objective and about following a procedure systematically and creating a tightly controlled environment where you as the researcher pull all of the strings. And then one of the students said that they're more comfortable working in a controlled environment. And they found working in qualitative research quite scary because of that. Now, the thing I should have said in response, but I didn't think of telling them, and I should have, was that I find it scary too. Qualitative work scares the heck out of me all the time, and I find it really challenging. But that's one of the reasons why I do it. It shifts me away from the thing that I find easy. I actually loved the controlled environment of laboratories. I loved statistics. I love how statistical analysis is just following rules, and there's a clear right and wrong way of doing things most of the time. And I'm kind of a sort of person who likes that stuff. I'm one of those people who makes lists, lots of lists, and I put labels on things, and I've got spreadsheets for things you wouldn't ever imagine anyone would want to create a spreadsheet for. I try I put unnecessary order on my life. I like that kind of control and predictability. But I became a qualitative researcher, not because it suited me, because it didn't, but because it stops me from being complacent. It challenges me, but it also allows me to ask particular types of research questions that gives me a chance to listen to people's stories. And I think stories are really important. It's how we come to understand other people, which is what psychology is kind of all about. And it's particularly important as it gives us the chance to capture and learn from the experiences of people living on the margins, people who are socially and economically excluded. And stories are really important. We've got to hear people's stories because they challenge the way the world is. Now, quantitative data on social inequalities kind of creates the fuel for social change, for a more socially equitable world. But it's the sharing of people's stories of inequality that creates the spark. The statistics on deaths in custody and killings by police of black people has been known for quite some time. But it was those images of Floyd George that sparked the protests in the US and across the world and have started that process of social change. And there's a reason why in those protests a dominant chant was "say their name." Say their name. It's the need to see the person behind the statistics, and that's what qualitative methods do. It shows the person behind the statistics, and that's what most of us relate to. We mostly relate to hearing people's stories, and that's why qualitative research is so important for psychology, because if psychology loses its focus on the people behind the statistics, it rapidly loses its ability to create meaningful social change. So that's why I do qualitative research, even though I find it desperately uncomfortable to do it. So I'm not that different from my students, and maybe I should have told them that. Anyway, I'm kind of telling them that now, if they watch this. If they don't, then it's going to be my little secret. Okay, anyway, enough from me. That's all for now. Till next time. Ta-da.